So we start with our character. Now, how do you actually start with a character? That's another very good question. You know, how do you come up with a character that's going to lead your story? I tend to, or at least my personal thinking on it, and I think it's something a lot of people don't pay enough attention to, so I would really recommend doing this even as an exercise. I start thinking what they're called. What is the name of that character? Names are actually incredibly, incredibly important, okay? And it's something that not enough people pay attention to. And I think one aspect of it I've noticed a lot growing up and watching people, you know, as someone who didn't grow up in America, you know, I can't write American science fiction. But people who don't grow up in America and want to write American science fiction because they read American science fiction, they write about John and Jane. John and Jane Smith from New York, you know, who are pretty much non-people. They are sort of our vague idea of what Americans might be like, and they're probably quite strange. So John and Jane, they're kind of like your name, you know, they're actually the names you give to unidentified corpses. Jane and John Doe, or what do you call it? An unidentified corpse, because it's a very common name. So what is the name of the character? Because names tell you pretty much everything about a person. It tells you where they're from, what culture they're from, what period of time they're from. You know, even if I think of, you know, names that have gone out of fashion. You know, there are certain names that were given to people in a certain decade and then no one calls them anymore. So if you hear their name, you can almost pinpoint what decade they're from, what culture they're from. But the other thing about names that's really important is that they have meanings. Most names have meanings. And I don't know, if you really want to get into your character, remember, you're writing fiction. You're not writing about a real person. You're writing fiction. In fiction, everything has to work together towards something that is more than the sum of its parts. So the name of the character not only tells us a lot about that person straight away, where they're from, what their background is, what era of history it came from, but it can also have the literary meaning of the name can then inform the story and the themes of the story. You know, and occasionally I like to play with names and give people slightly crazy names that make me laugh, you know, and that are a bit out there. Or what science fiction writers love to do is they want to show the society that they're writing about is so mixed now that the characters will have, say, a Japanese first name and a Hungarian last name, which is what you get in Altered Carbon, for example, where you get Takeshi Kovacs as your main character. So we know at some point in his past he had Hungarian and Japanese ancestry. So that's that's one of those tricks that science fiction writers love to do. They love to mix it up. But it's really important. It's really a good place to start about your characters. Just what their name is, because it tells you so much about them. The other thing I like to do with characters to give them, oh, I might have to add someone in. There we go. The other thing you can do with characters that I find quite useful, and again, it's a shorthand. It's not something you need to delve deeply into for thousands and thousands of words. But one of the most illuminating things for any character in any fictional setting, doesn't matter if you're writing science fiction or any other genre, is their childhood. Okay, childhood informs the adult. And if we get even just a glimpse of what they were like as children, it tells us who they are as adults in a much more powerful way than if you just told us who they are, what they're feeling. And so I always like to have even just a little glimpse at a moment from their childhood, a moment that shapes where they are in the story now, you know. And you're always looking for the emotional core in a story, you know, what gives it truth, because you're essentially making stuff up, and you're making stuff up about nonsense like matter transmission and identity transfers and all the cool stuff that we like in science fiction. But what gives it heart is really the people in our world. And what gives those people heart is the experiences that you have to kind of cannibalize out of yourself. That's what imbues it with power, is, you know, because everyone goes through pain and suffering and heartbreak and misery. and happiness. And you need to kind of go in at that point and take it from yourself and give some of that to your character to make it come alive.